Bumpy roads have soft shoulders, a story by Nicole Porlier. Nicole is in the studio today to tell us about her story and the disease that she's had since she was a child. Nicole, thank you very much for doing this and opening up to our viewers.
Hi.
So let's start off. What exactly is your disease?
So it's called neurofibromatosis, and basically it's a genetic disorder that I was born with. The symptoms can vary, but the most prominent symptoms are what we call, the French version is café au lait spots. So café au lait is coffee and milk. I have a couple spots on my neck area, and then on my leg there's like a larger birth spot, and if the freckles are a certain diameter apart, that's another possible symptom of NF. So basically the fibromas, which are otherwise known as tumors, are tumors that wrap themselves around the nerves.
Okay.
So when I was born, I had these symptoms, but the fibromas themselves didn't come out because they're actually underneath the skin. So in some instances, there's first of all, it's 1 in 3,000 for NF1. That's the most common NF. NF2 is less common. It's 1 in 10,000 birth, so no particular gender or race. It's anybody can have it.
So it's not genetic?
It's a genetic disorder, but in my case it was genetic. It can be hereditary.
Okay.
So in my case it wasn't hereditary. I mean, my husband and I decided not to have children.
Okay.
But if, let's say, we had children, our children could have had NF, or it could skip a generation.
Right.
So in my case, it was more a spontaneous mutation, which is basically something happened in the conception where something didn't go wrong, but it was just something different happened.
Okay.
And so this is what I was basically born with.
And when you wrote this book, did you write it for everybody, or did you write it to comfort others who are also suffering with this?
I wrote it for everybody. It's not just, it's my personal story, but I personally feel that this book was more a way to spread awareness, but it can relate to anybody, whether it's a breakup, whether you lose somebody, whether you have a problem with your weight, whatever it is, everybody has their own story, and I felt that I needed to share my story because I felt over the years as I was growing up, although I had a lot of support from family, thankfully, just things that I had gone through at school, questions I was asked. At some point in my life, I decided that I didn't want to be asked anymore, and I thought now I realize the more I get asked, the more I'm going to open up and let them know what it is. Because if someone asks and I get defensive, then they'll walk away with no information. Whereas now when someone asks, I tell them what it is so that they can walk away, maybe meet someone else who has NF, say, oh, you know what, and then, or they can speak about me and say, you know what, today I met someone, and funny enough, you know, she was open and told me about what she had, and then they may or may not look it up, you know, online or whatever, but there's always an opportunity to and as soon as someone mentions it, oh my God, I met someone, then that person would say, oh, you know what, I know someone too, and it kind of roller coasters from there, and I think it's a lot more positive than being defensive, but, you know, because it took me a very long time to accept that this is what I had, I just, I never hid out, but I went through some very, very difficult times with some people that were not very nice and not very, I won't say educated, but just in general more curious, but in a negative way.
So in the book, what's the book kind of about? Is it more of a story of your life? Is it more of a factual book? Talking more about NF?
Not so much factual. There is a chapter that explains, because obviously NF is a mouthful to pronounce. So I do explain a little bit about what NF1 is, what NF2, a little bit of medical background, but very limited, just so people know, okay, so what is this? Like, this is my story, living with NF, what does NF stand for, kind of thing. But then it's more of my story, my school experiences, you know, things that I went through to accept this condition, you know, how my husband and I met, my life today.
Let's talk about that. Let's, okay, you know, because the book is probably very therapeutic. probably because
yes,
you're able to release a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know, you probably went through some tough times in school. How did you meet your husband?
Well, my husband probably laughed because every time I tell the story, he says, "Oh no, not again! I heard this story before." But it's a really nice, it's a beautiful thing. We both joined a kind of a dating agency, but not the typical agency where you go in and they kind of ask all the questions, but more of a kind of an agency where you join as a member, and then you have a list of all the different events that you can possibly go to. So it's kind of all the singles that mingle together, and then you know, you choose whichever one. So we both chose a Chinese restaurant. It was a dinner and dance event, and Dennis was there, and I was there as well. But I didn't notice him. I was mingling with other people, and so was he. But somehow he said afterwards that he kind of noticed me a little bit. So then we ended up sitting at the same table, and the first thing I noticed is that his name was spelled with one N, so Denis, which is the French version. So I asked him, you know, do you pronounce your name Dennis or Denis? And so that's kind of how it all triggered our evening. And after that, we just had a nice conversation. We ended up speaking French together, and so many things in common. His sister and I have the same birthday. He loves animals. I love animals. You know, he has a cat and a dog. I have a cat and dog. You know, it was like, wow, this is meant to be.
So it all started with Chinese food and
yes,
the
that's right. That's all with Chinese food. That's right.
And I also want to bring up that all the proceeds from this book go to a charity.
Yes, that's
dear
right.
To you, so
NF has different chapters all across Canada. There was a one called NF Canada, which they closed their doors, but NF Ontario or NFSO has existed for a long time. So I was on the board of the NF Canada, and then I met the director, who's now the director of the BCNF charity. So, excuse me, basically she helped me kind of with this, and then I found out about the camp, and the camp is located in Salt Lake City, Utah. So before even writing my book, I helped with a silent auction, and all the proceeds went to this camp as well. And I was able to send one child to camp then, and then I walked 3 half marathons, 2 of which, one I walked on my own, there was 7 people, but on my own for NF, and all the proceeds again went to NF again for children. And now this summer, I actually found a teenager. Yeah. He's 17 years old. His mother is on the new board of the NFSO, and I'm taking him to camp. So since I wrote the book, I've raised quite a bit of money, but right now, as it stands, I've got about $2,500 saved up, and I'm going to use that amount or part of that amount to send him to camp, and I'm going with him to camp because I wanted to give him an opportunity to have a week where he can really have fun. And this camp is really primarily for all kids with NF. So I'm hoping that when I go, I'll be bringing my books and speaking to other children and, you know, what they've gone through, and the possibility of maybe writing a second book, but more with the children involved, and, you know, like every child. Okay, so you're 13. What's your experience? You're 15. What's your experience? And then kind of do a compilation of different stories together.
Thank you so much for coming out and doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Watching, and thank you so much for watching our first segment of 2015, and we will see you next week. Bye.